13th president of the National Press Club. I'm the former general manager of CBS Radio Network, now journalist in residence at University of Maryland Global Campus, and executive producer of the public broadcasting series The Kalb Report with Marvin Kalb. There's a plaque at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown containing a quote from the French-American historian Jacques Barzun that reads, "Whoever wants to know the heart and mind of America had better know baseball." This summer, perhaps unlike any other in history, to know baseball is to know America. Last week, the delayed opening of the season showed how we can face significant odds and maintain our composure and our traditions in the midst of crisis. This week, Major League Baseball is reeling after word that more than a dozen members of the Miami Marlins organization have tested positive for the novel coronavirus, forcing the postponement of games and bringing into question the chances of successfully completing a shortened season and ultimately a World Series. Joining us to talk about the launch of our national pastime during a global pandemic while trying to maintain the health and safety of players, staff, and those who cover the games is the president of the Baseball Writers Association of America, Paul Sullivan, a multi-award winning 39-year veteran of the Chicago Tribune who covers both the White Sox and the Cubs and is a columnist. Paul, welcome to the National Press Club.
Thanks for having me.
So here we are on the front end of the most unusual Major League Baseball season in history with an abbreviated 60-game schedule, masks on players, no high fives, photos of fans in the stands, and recorded crowd noise pumped in through stadium audio systems. For many of us, it's just good to have baseball back, even if it seems surreal. I'm wondering first if you share that thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, after sitting on the couch for months and, watching reruns of old games, just being in a ballpark again was really refreshing and satisfying, even with all the the fake crowd noise and the masks, and it's different and it's weird and it's it's hard to sit there in a press box with a mask on for 8-9 hours writing in the heat with no air conditioning because we can't have AC now. But on the whole, I'm just glad it's back, and I'm just praying that we can get through the rest of this 60-game season and the playoffs.
Talk about opening day, if you would, and you alluded to some of the complications that you've had to deal with already, particularly no air conditioning in the press box and having to wear a mask for 8 or 9 hours at a time. What was it like this year on opening day or opening days for you?
Well, the opening day was perfect. It was just a beautiful night at Wrigley Field. The game actually went quickly because Kyle Hendricks pitched a three-hitter complete game, and nothing that we expected. So it was really no problems the opening night. We're pretty used to the Zooming. We can't talk to the players in person or the manager in person anymore. So all our interviews are conducted via Zoom. So we had most of summer camp, 3.5 weeks to get used to that. So that went pretty smoothly. So the first day, 2 days, I was at Sox Park. The next day doing the White Sox. The first weekend actually went really well. But now the teams are on the road. I'm at home, so I'm not experiencing that. But I think it's going to be a little different traveling for writers now. And obviously with the situation with the Marlins and, a third of their team testing positive for COVID, I think it's kind of a wake-up call for everyone that we really have to be on our toes at all times.
What are the safety protocols for the writers and any of the broadcasters that are coming to the ballpark?
Well, obviously they're keeping us way, way, way far away from any of the players or the staff. We, get there. We have temperature checks to see if we can get in. If you're over 100 degrees, then you're not going to get in. They'll wait. Sometimes you're sweating in line so they can retest you in a few minutes. But we go through that. We answer a bunch of questions, whether we've had any symptoms, or whether we've been, in contact with anyone that has COVID. And then there's a line to the press box. You can't waver out of that. We're not allowed to, wander around the stadiums. There's no food there, so if you're planning on, not being hungry, you have to bring your own. Basically, just water, some pop there, and there's partitions. We're all socially distanced in the press box, but you really aren't allowed to move very far. The Cubs, fortunately, did make a section available for us in the upper deck where we can go, relax for a little while, because, sitting in a seat for 8, 9 hours with a mask on is a little constraining.
The broadcasters sometimes get more visibility than the writers do, but most of us who are baseball fans rely on the beat writers for the teams for the intimacy of coverage. And there are lots of stories that are developed over the course of a year about the psychology of a team, the mood of the team, trajectories, both up and down for teams. It must be harder to get that sense of intimacy when you're engaging in Zoom interviews with these folks.
Oh, completely, totally. It's changed our jobs drastically. A beat writer, that's his whole thing, is to have a good relationship with players and managers, and trying to gather information that your competition doesn't have. You want to write different stories. You want to write better stories. You want to do one-on-one reporting that no one else can do. But that's gone, at least for this year. All the Zoom interviews, any question you have, any answer you get is going to be shared with all the rest of the media. So it's going to be very difficult to get any kind of scoops. It's going to be very difficult to establish relationships with the players. Fortunately, I already have some, and most of the beat writers already have their own relationships. But if you only have a few players available every day, it just makes sense that the writers are going to write mostly the same stories. So as a columnist, it's a little easier for me, because I don't have to go the same path as everyone else. I can come up with something different, and I try and do that. But very, very difficult for beat writers in this day and age.
So the beat writers are engaging in something closer to pool coverage this year, where everybody gets to hear what you're doing, and that resonates, of course, with a lot of our own journalists who are members of the National Press Club. So thank you for that. The Baseball Writers Association of America has ruled the press boxes of the major league ballparks since 1908. That was the same year that the National Press Club was founded, and of course, up until just a few years ago, that was the last year that the Chicago Cubs had won a World Series. What role, if any, did the writers have in determining the protocols for covering the games this year? Did MLB include your organization in the discussions about that?
Well, they did include us in discussions, and me and members of my board, I have a 4-member board that were on discussions with MLB before the protocols were put in place. I would say that we had some say, but not a whole lot, because if it was up to us, we would have interviews with players socially distanced, but we would have face-to-face interviews with players. And honestly, I really don't understand why we can't. I understand they're very worried about the spread of COVID possibly from the media to the players, but they do it at the White House, they do it at press briefings in states, governments every day. There is a way to do it from a safe social distance. They did not allow us to do that. Also, we had an agreement that to open press boxes 4 hours before games, and teams are just going rogue and doing whatever they want. Opening the Cincinnati Reds are opening theirs an hour before the games. The White Sox are doing it 2 hours before the games, and that maybe the reader doesn't notice that or maybe doesn't care, but we're in our cars sometimes, doing interviews, Zoom interviews in our cars, or just waiting to get into ballparks. It's not a very good atmosphere for the writers to do their jobs. I mean, most teams are complying with the regulations, but a lot of them are really making it difficult for the media, I have to admit.
And it probably takes a lot of the writers back to earlier times in their careers when you have to pull out a lot of resources to get the story. And I'm sure thoughts come back in the minds of a lot of people who are viewing this today of doing interviews in their cars at another time and going the distance to get the story more than anything else. So it's good to have those experiences under your belt. I'm sure it's like riding a bicycle. You just go back to doing it. It doesn't make it the way you want to do it, but at least you know how to do it.
Yeah, I understand, and we can do it.
Yeah.
And but to me, the problem is we did negotiate these things with MLB, and teams are just ignoring it, and MLB is not doing anything to stand with us. So, Yaska, did we negotiate with the MLB about these things? And we did, but it didn't seem to matter in some instances.
It's interesting. An analogy comes to mind in a more normalized situation of the relationship between presidents and the press, where there's a negotiation on everything, and then sometimes that one side just ignores what was negotiated and just goes off and does what it wants.
It's very frustrating as the president during this pandemic because we've opened up the lines of communications with all the different chapters, so we're hearing all the different problems that everyone's having. Like even in Washington, we can't have air conditioning, so the press boxes are open, but then at the end of the game, they have the cleaning crews come in and close the windows, so they're in there steaming in the press box while they're writing, instead of just leaving the windows open and then cleaning, coming back in an hour or two. So it's just little things like that I think need to be fixed. But hopefully, we're in the first week. Hopefully, they will be fixed.
Well, good luck with all of that. It sounds like it's a time of a lot of experimentation right now to get a rhythm of how to cover this season.
It's going to take a while.
Question from a press club member: covering baseball suddenly has become covering public health, and it's not always easy for reporters to make such a leap, including vice versa. If a health reporter suddenly had to cover baseball games. Could you speak to that from a practitioner standpoint? Are you moving into some uncharted territory in what you cover?
Definitely. Because especially it's difficult because the virus is so mysterious, and it seems to be, by the week they're changing. For a while at the beginning, there was no, they did say, oh, you don't need to wear a mask, and now everybody has to wear a mask, obviously. So we're not experts. We don't know, exactly how it's spread, except that it's through the air. The thing that really I have to say is we don't want to be spreading it. We understand that teams are investing all this kind of money in players, and they want to keep them safe, and we agree with that. We don't want to get it either, but it just seems like sometimes that they're more concerned about the players getting it than the fact that the media could also get it as well. So we're all in this together, and we don't know everything about it, but we're doing the best we can and writing about it the best we can. you know, I go with Dr. Fauci. Whatever he says, I generally agree with, and but you can't even write that anymore because then people will come down on you for that. So, you know, it's just a very politicized country at this point.
Right, absolutely. Um, in your situation in Chicago, you have the luxury, which not many American cities have, of two major league teams with the Cubs and the White Sox. Talk about what it's like to cover both the Cubs and the White Sox, two very different franchises.
It is. It's you know, it's getting a little bit more generic as the years go on. You know, the Cubs used to be the day baseball and beautiful Wrigley Field, and no one really cared if they won or lost as long as they could, you know, get some get a nice tan and you know, drink some beers. And the Sox was considered the more rowdy team, the more, you know, working class part of town. And I think that's changed over the years. Obviously, night baseball at Wrigley Field has changed a lot of it. And when the Ricketts came in, they really have changed the whole neighborhood. I don't know if you've been there lately, but it's totally different than it was 10 years ago. It's almost like a downtown area at times. Whereas White Sox play in an area where, you know, there's really nothing there that you can do outside the ballpark. As for the teams themselves, you know, baseball is baseball, so there's really not a whole lot of difference. But they are two very different organizations. Jerry Reinsdorf's been in baseball forever. Ricketts is a relative newbie with he's been in about 10 years now. So you know, it's different, but it's getting more generic as the years go on, I think.
Baseball is one of the few industries where you're still a newbie after 10 years, like the Ricketts,
Yeah.
the Ricketts family. And I'm curious, were you in Chicago going all the way back to the Bill Veeck ownership and things like Disco Demolition Night?
Yes, I was actually at Disco Demolition Night as a fan. This is before I was in the business. I was just a foolish college student back in that era. And yes, I was on the field. Rioting, I guess, is what they call it, but it was really just running around the field and sliding into the bases. So, yeah, I'm very familiar with Bill Veeck. I actually sat in the bleachers with him at Wrigley Field quite a few times before he passed away. So I got to know him a little bit there. Just a great human being, and you know, one of baseball's originals. Invented the exploding scoreboard, which unfortunately we can't use. They can't use fireworks at Sox Park these days because of the pandemic. But yeah, he was in a class by himself.
And a bit ahead of his time, I think,
Way ahead of his time. Way ahead of his
with
time.
his
He really entered,
generation.
you know, the scoreboard, the exploding scoreboard, and the fireworks. I mean, that was regarded as blasphemy by some back in the early '60s because, oh, this is baseball. We don't have that. And now it's, you know, it's nonstop stuff on scoreboards, videos, and, you know, anything goes now.
You were talking
Or at least
about
people. Yeah.
you were talking about how once you get to the baseball, it's pretty much the same. One of the things that has changed this year, though, as part of the rules for this shortened season, is a designated hitter in both leagues.
Yeah.
I'm curious what your thoughts are about some of these rule changes, like the DH in both leagues and starting 10th inning with a man on second base. How are these going over?
Well, the DH, I assumed all along that was going to fall. I knew that a lot of National League people wanted to insert the DH into the league. I'm against it personally, but you know, I just figured that was inevitable. The rule about putting a base runner on second base was inserted this year in extra innings just to speed the game along. I don't agree with that. I feel like that's cheapening the game because you know, how did he get on second base? I don't even know how to score it, honestly. I understand the thinking is that they don't want to go through all these bullpens, and it's a short season, and maybe it's just for this year. But I think they're going to keep that rule, and I do think that that's not the way baseball is played. It's kind of like, I don't like the hockey rule where just have shootouts at the end of games. I would even rather have a tie game than just putting a runner on second, honestly.
You get the impression sometimes that MLB is pulling out a lot of things out of its hat that it's been thinking about and might like to have implement, and this is the opportunity. So why not seize the moment with the shortened season to do it?
I understand that thinking, and if it is just for this year, okay, that's fine. But I think we've seen the last few years with Rob Manfred that he's a different kind of commissioner. He's you could say what you want about Bud Selig. He was a baseball fan, and he knew his baseball. Maybe you didn't agree with some of the things he did, but I think the decisions he made were made by a baseball fan. And with Manfred, I feel like the decisions he makes is made by a businessman or a CEO, and that he's not really thinking about the traditions of the game. He's thinking about money, which is fine. I understand that. I mean, he basically is a CEO. I think the commissioner title is kind of useless these days, because he's really the CEO of the owners. He's not the commissioner of the players. They have their own union leader. So it's kind of a misnomer these days. And nothing against Rob Manfred. He seems like a perfectly nice person. But, sometimes I do wonder how much of the game he really understands.
And Bud Selig here in Washington will be somewhere between lionized and canonized for allowing the Montreal Expos to move to D.C. So there's a guy who can principally do no wrong to many of us here in.
Well, yeah, and kind of unpopular for the strike, canceling the season '94, and for some other things. And I'm not saying he was the greatest guy, but I'm just saying he was a baseball fan, and Manfred may be a baseball fan, but he's more a money fan, I think.
Well, we've had him here at the press club twice, and he's. I appreciate the fact that he's been willing to come and sit and go through an hour's worth of questions. But he clearly sees a path for baseball that may be a little different than what we've seen previously.
And I understand that they're trying to build the game towards a younger generation that is really turned off by the pace of the game, the slowness of the game. And I've known this personally because, one of my nephews, sixth grade, he doesn't watch baseball anymore. He played it for a while, but he just says it's too boring. And so I understand that they do have to work to get this next generation in, and that people like me are, we're a dying breed. But I just think there can be a happy medium, and I think the rule changes are just coming too fast now, and you're going to change the whole complexion of the game of baseball. And if there's one thing that baseball has over the other sports, it's its traditions, and that it's past. It goes back over a century, and that I think they're in danger of losing that.
For those who may have just joined us, we are speaking with Paul Sullivan, the president of the Baseball Writers Association of America and a 39-year veteran of the Chicago Tribune, who is a columnist and covers both the White Sox and the Cubs for the Tribune. Let's talk about stats and this year. What do you think MLB should do about stats this year? You won't have to worry about most of the records, but what if somebody hits 400 this year? Should there be an asterisk next to that stat?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the whole season is going to basically have an asterisk behind it, even if there isn't a concrete asterisk. People are going to always think of this as a different kind of season, assuming that this is an anomaly and that this isn't the wave of the future, because we really don't know what baseball is going to be like in the future. People, I think, are just assuming that, yeah, next year it'll be back to the same and there will be people in the stands. But I don't see that unless there is a vaccine by then, and which we hope there is, but who knows. But as far as stats, I don't know if there's anything you can do about it. It would be strange to have a 400 hitter come out of this season. I still don't think there will be, but I don't know what you can do about it. It's a short season, and I think it's just got to stand.
Right. It wouldn't have been unusual, for instance, to see a Tony Gwynn or a George Brett hovering around 460 games into the season.
For sure. And Tony Gwynn, I believe, almost hit 400 during the strike season before it was canceled in middle August. So, there is a possibility. But one thing we know, they won't break Barry Bonds' home run record this year. I'm pretty sure of that, no matter how tightly the balls are wound.
And they do appear to be wound pretty tight.
They are
right
very
now.
wound. As are all of us these days.
Good point. This is abstract, but we may be dealing with it soon. If the season ends early, before a proper conclusion, should these stats count this year, or should we just wipe everything off the books for this season and write it off?
Oh, that's a good question. I never thought of that. I guess it would depend on, I don't know, because some guys are going for milestones, and you don't want to have that wiped off. It's maybe your last chance. I know John Lester's like 8 or 9 wins away from 200 wins, and it would be a shame to wipe something like that out if he got there. I don't know. I never thought of that, honestly. I'm trying to think positive that they won't wipe out the season. They were going to continue, but honestly, I don't know the answer to that one.
Well, we're all hoping that we won't have to deal with that this year.
Yeah.
The Astros are, by some standards, pretty lucky this year. Given the fact that we're in the midst of a crisis, they have not had to endure what they would have as they entered ballparks this season for the cheating scandal that resulted in the year-long suspension for the manager and the general manager. Should this count as the suspension year for those people? It's still a year.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's unfortunate that the suspension is only, a couple months instead of an entire season. But, that's the luck of the draw. I mean, you just can't change everything. That's how it's going to be. And then you're right. They are lucky that they're not going to be booed in person, but they are being booed on Twitter all the time. And, as we saw, Justin Verlander's injured, so maybe there's some karma coming into place for the Astros. Who knows?
There is some conversation now, particularly with what's happened to the Florida Marlins and conceivably could happen to other clubs, about the difference between baseball teams traveling, and proximity in the dugout. And I'm wondering if you think this outbreak on the Marlins, and it may be way too early to tell, is more a result of baseball activities like being close in the dugout, and we still see players still patting each other, high-fiving. These are hard habits to break. Or is it possible that because baseball didn't embrace the bubble concept off the field, could that be a factor here? I don't know whether there's a discussion going on between whether baseball should have gone into a bubble somewhere, the way the NBA is doing.
Yeah, I think Manfred talked to MLB Network about that maybe yesterday or a couple days ago, and he has no regrets about that. That would have been a very difficult thing to do with the number of players and teams, and they were going to the bubbles that they had in mind were Phoenix, Florida, and Texas. So that would have been pretty hard to play in the outdoor stadiums in this kind of heat in those places. And plus, players didn't want to separate from their families for that long a time. So I don't know how much that was really considered. As far as the Marlins, I'm not sure. It's so hard to say because of we don't know, exactly how it was transmitted. And there was a story that their flight was delayed because they had to change flight crew because at least one or two members of the flight crew tested positive. And then instead of changing planes, they just changed the flight crew, which to me doesn't make sense. But so there's a possibility they got it just on the charter. And then you're right, in the dugouts, you can socially distance, but there's still I've seen high-fiving. I've seen guys going up and talking to guys on other teams. So it's impossible to have a real bubble in baseball. And I think you're going to have to live with some of these outbreaks, and hopefully they can contain them. I don't know what the Marlins are going to do. I mean, that's a lot of players that can't play, and it's basically going to be a AAA team if they do come back for the rest of the season. So that skews the whole competition in the National League East. And with the expanded playoffs and the more teams fighting for wild card teams, the National League East teams have the kind of advantage of all getting to play against a AAA team in their own division. So there's just so many things that this is going to change. And not even to mention the Phillies and the Yankees not being able to play because the Marlins affected the visiting clubhouse there in Philly.
Thank you. I'd like to ask some more general questions, and we have a number of questions coming in by email from our press club members. In terms of your writing, who do you write for? You know that the fans are reading what you're writing every day in the Trib, online, in the hard copy paper. Do you feel that as you write your stories, you're thinking about what your editors want, what the players may think, or strictly what your observations are?
I'm sure everyone does it differently. Personally, I just write for the readers myself. I don't really care what the players think. I think if you go over my history, that's pretty obvious. I don't care what the owners think, and I don't care what the general managers think. I'm writing for the people, the fans of the team that I'm covering, either the White Sox or the Cubs or whoever. I do think that it's different for a newspaper writer because we have such a broad audience. I could be writing. There could be a 9-year-old boy at home reading, as I did, learning to read for the first time, reading newspapers through the sports section. And I don't want to go over, use a lot of words that are over his head or concepts. And I'm also writing for a 90-year-old fan that's been reading his whole life. I don't, some people like to throw in numbers a lot, sabermetrics and analytics, and I understand that. And I do believe there's an audience for that. And a lot of online writers do it that way. I don't do that because I don't feel like my audience of Tribune readers are all into the analytics. So I try and keep away from that while acknowledging that analytics are a part of the game, but I'm not going to, stress it as much as some other writers. But, you just have to write what you feel people want to read. I've been accused of writing like I'm sitting in a bar stool next to a fan. And I view that as a compliment, but some people think of that as not a good thing. So.
Well, I've known a lot of writers who will be approached by fans, and the fans feel they know you. You may never have met that person, but they know you,
Yeah.
right? And
Oh yeah.
and they don't
Yeah.
hold back on what they think about what you wrote or what they think about you, right?
They don't. And honestly, I was in a bar a few years ago with my dad, and some fan came up to me and just started giving his opinions on the Cubs, and I was kind of, standoffish, and hey, I'm here with my dad, and, leave me alone, kind of thing. And he kind of chastised me afterwards. He said, these people want to talk to you. They want to give you their opinions because they feel like you're someone that they know, and so I've tried to take that to heart since then, and be nice to people that give me their unsolicited opinions on the Cubs and Sox. And sometimes I really don't want to hear it, but it's an occupational hazard, so I try and listen. I try and be a better listener for that.
Who are some of the people that you most admire, over the course of your career as writers? And they don't necessarily have to be sports writers. You were talking to me before and said that you did reporting for Mike Royko, the legendary columnist for the Trib. Talk about some of the people who've influenced you.
Well, definitely Mike Royko, probably number one. Even before I worked for him, I grew up reading him in the Chicago Daily News, and he was the premier columnist in Chicago. When he wrote about sports, he was the premier sports columnist. When he wrote about politics, he was number one political columnist. I was very fortunate to get to learn under him. And it was very difficult. I always compared it to like being a quarterback under Mike Ditka. He's very hard on you, but after you're done, you realize the reasoning for it. I grew up reading the Tribune and the Sun-Times, but mostly the Tribune. It's been in my family's home for my entire life. So some of the great writers like Bob Birdie, David Israel. I can go on and on. As far as just regular writers, I was a big Hunter Thompson fan growing up. I loved reading his crazy madcap episodes. So, and I was also, I have to say, influenced by, Saturday Night Live and, George Carlin and just that kind of humor from the 70s. Early Saturday Night Live, Belushi and all them. I think that kind of formed my way of writing. And I don't, if you read me, I don't really take things very seriously a lot. And sometimes maybe a little overboard in my not taking it too seriously, because sometimes baseball fans want you to be more serious. But I think you should be, a little light sometimes. Sometimes you have to be heavy and give a, really strong opinion. But it's good to have a mix, I think.
And that early Saturday Night Live was so influenced by Second City, which is based in Chicago. And that,
oh yes, I love Second City.
That humor, yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
Tell us about the next generation of baseball writers. Do you see some young people coming up now as you hit the peak of your own career here as a more mature writer?
This is not the peak.
well,
yeah, that was a long time ago.
Tell us what you see. Tell us what you see on the horizon here.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, but no, I'm my prime. I'm 61 now, so I don't have too many years left in this. I don't think. I think I was very fortunate to do it when I did, because the future for baseball writing, unfortunately, does not look as bright, and no reflection on the writers, because the young writers that I do see at a lot of them are working for The Athletic and at other organizations, newspapers. Very, very bright and great writing. Just know the game. They know the numbers and the analytics, so probably way more than me. But I'm afraid that this Zoom thing is here to stay. And I know that they say it's just for this season, but I don't know. I just see not just baseball, but other sports closing down their locker rooms in the future and saying this is your only access is what, what we say you can have. I hope I'm wrong. I pray that I'm wrong, but I just have a feeling that now that they have had some success with their Zooming, that they're going to say, hey, yeah, we kind of like it. We don't want you in our clubhouses. And that'll have a negative effect on writers' relationships with players because they won't get to know them in the future like we did. And it'll have just a cascading effect on the industry, honestly.
Of course, one of the elements of controversy over the years involving locker rooms was women sports writers and sportscasters going into locker rooms, and that has opened up dramatically over the last few years. What's your take on the number of women that are currently engaged in the Baseball Writers Association of America and in more prominent positions in the sports journalism field?
Honestly, I wish there was more because the ones that are in are there's some of the best writers. Chelsea James from the Washington Post, she's now in politics, but she was a great baseball writer, one of my favorites. I actually miss her writing in the baseball field. I think it's a good profession for a woman now. I think teams are, those days when a lot of players didn't want to talk to women, those are over with. And there are more women in the industry. I think The Athletic is helping to, diversify things. So we have quite a few great writers at the Tribune here. Shannon Ryan and Colleen Kane. Tony Giannetti from the Sun-Times was one of the pioneers in Chicago. Claire Smith, obviously Hall of Famer. So if you're a woman and you love sports and you like to write, I think it's a great business to get into. And I think some of the problems of the past with the players, athletes not being receptive, I think those are fading away with this new generation of players that are a lot more understanding.
And Chelsea James, who you mentioned, is an absolutely terrific writer for the Washington Post, and did spend several years as a beat writer for the Washington Nationals, and broke a number of really big stories for the Nationals. And as a professor, Chelsea has spoken to several of my classes, and she talks about being a woman and being in the locker room and just having to overcome a lot of those old stereotypes that still exist. They still remain out there, and we are so many years past a woman who was so important to women in sports journalism, whose name is not largely mentioned a lot, and that's Melissa Ludke, who helped break the locker room ban for women when she was with Sports Illustrated and tried to cover the New York Yankees in the World Series, and that went to the Supreme Court. So we hope we're in a new day. We're seeing, of course, this spring and summer outcries for all kinds of things that are so important that have been focuses of attention periodically in our country and then have gone out of focus, and now in very, very major ways are coming back into focus for us, including the outcry for racial equality and for social justice in our country. Tell us about the National Anthem and taking a knee for the National Anthem, which seems to be becoming quite a movement within baseball. It is something that more players, not only players but managers and others, are adapting in order to make a statement. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Yes, I think this is actually a recent thing for baseball. Obviously, Kaepernick and NFL players were ahead of the curve, and kind of paying the price with some people. Unfortunately, Kaepernick, basically banned from football for his views. The NBA, the last few years, has been very vocal about systemic racism and talking about it, wearing, I can't breathe shirts. I know Derrick Rose and LeBron, several players. And I think baseball was a little behind, honestly, in that. But all the protests since the George Floyd murder, I think that's changed the way of thinking in baseball. And Theo Epstein, the Cubs president, Ken Williams, the White Sox vice president, were very instrumental in getting baseball to, change its thinking here and to, get the players and teams, organizations to be more vocal. I see there's a Black Lives Matter giant sign at Fenway Park. That you talk about the kneeling, the Yankees and the Nationals in the opener, and other players throughout the league. I think it's something that's here to stay. And people that don't accept it, I feel sorry for you. Like Mike Ditka the other day saying, get the hell out of the country. That's just backwards thinking. It has nothing to do with the troops, it has nothing to do with the flag. So I think baseball is getting the message out now, a little late, but better late than never.
A few weeks ago, when we first communicated with each other, I had mentioned something to you and just posed a question for the Baseball Writers Association, and because it has become a source of conversation more recently, and that is that the Most Valuable Player trophy currently has the name of the first commissioner of baseball, Judge Landis, on it. And I had called because there was some support for changing that to perhaps honor Frank Robinson, who is another revered figure here in Washington and, of course, also in Baltimore, the first manager of the Washington Nationals, but also baseball's first African-American manager and the only person to win the Most Valuable Player award in both leagues. So I'm curious where things stand in your discussions about, because it is the baseball writers who vote the Most Valuable Player, and whether there's ongoing conversation about that.
Yes, we did start the conversation about right near the start of the summer camps, maybe a month ago. We've had opened up an online forum on our website for the writers to chime in on that. I would say almost, well, I would say a vast majority of the writers are for changing the name, getting rid of the Spink name, because he was against integration of baseball. But there is a lot of debate over whether we should just have no name, just call it the MVP award, or whether to name it after someone like Frank Robinson or some other player. So that's still being debated. And now that the season started, our focus right now is on just getting through the 60 games without, with our health intact. But we will be probably making some kind of decision before the end of the season, or at least at the end of the season.
Okay, thank you. A couple more questions that have come in. Do you think Pete Rose should be granted MLB reinstatement and Hall of Fame eligibility?
No. I may be in the minority on this, but I still think that, he broke the cardinal rule, and I know he's finally admitted it, but it took years and years for him to admit it. And, you pay the price. Does he deserve in the Hall of Fame, to be in the Hall of Fame? For sure. He was one of the greatest hitters of all time, but, he broke the rule. They said, this is the one rule you can't break. And I don't see why he deserves, to be absolved for that.
And do you think there should be a fan vote for the Hall of Fame? Why or why not?
No, because I don't know how you could control it. I mean, fans, you'd have Don Mattingly in the Hall of Fame because Yankees fans love Donnie baseball. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's not perfect to have the writers, just the writers. Understand people don't, really trust the writers' decisions sometimes. I do believe it could end up to broadcasters because they also see every game. But I think if you opened it up to fans, you would have a lot of people in that, are just fan favorites, honestly.
You were mentioning the
You probably have
broadcasters.
Barry Bonds in for sure. I mean.
Well, that raises the question about the difference between Pete Rose and those that have either been found guilty of or have been suspected of steroid use. What are your thoughts about the difference?
Well, I put them all in the same category. Honestly, they all committed cardinal sins. It's harder to judge some of the steroids guys because some of them, there's different levels of, some of it just the eye test. Some of it is, they were in Balco, and some of, like, Sammy Sosa was in the New York Times report on the anonymous testing, as was Big Papi. And, Sammy's paid the price, even though there's no smoking gun on him, he's not getting in. Whereas Big Papi, was able to play his career out after that report came out, and everyone loves him, and I have no doubt he'll get in probably first ballot even. So it is different, and I understand that. Personally, I don't vote for anyone that I suspect of doing steroids, and I know there are some guys that are in that I suspect of doing steroids recently. So it's just a conundrum, and I don't know how we, change it, but that's just, I don't see Bonds or Clemens getting in, honestly.
You're talking about the possibility somewhere down the road, if anybody else was allowed to vote, that it could be the broadcasters. And we were talking about it before we sat down for the conversation. The fact that some of the network broadcasters, and it wasn't lost on a lot of us, are not in the ballparks this year, that they, on the opening weekend, they were in studios many miles away covering the games. Do you discern a difference between the ability to call a game when you're in the park with them or when you're at that kind of distance?
Honestly, I've been covering the game, so I haven't been able to watch a whole lot of them on TV. But when I did watch opening night with A-Rod and whoever was Veskurgian, or I'm not really sure who he was with, but honestly, it sounded like they were there. And until they showed them, in their apartments or studios or wherever they were doing it from, I couldn't tell that they weren't together. I know that the Cubs and the White Sox and a lot of teams are going to their actual ballparks to do games. Even when their team is on the road, they're doing the broadcast as if they're on the road, but at their home ballparks. Others, like my friend Charlie Steiner, the Dodgers announcer, is doing his from his home. So I don't know. I guess I'd have to watch more to see if I could really tell the difference. But so far, I haven't seen much difference.
Okay. We have a question from one of our photographers, member of the National Press Club, who is asking whether you are familiar with limitations being put on photographers at the parks this year. Of course,
Yes.
Some of the most iconic images in baseball history have been taken by still photographers at games.
Yes, it's very, very disturbing. Some of these, they've got in the Cubs photographers, the Wrigley Field photographers were like out in the left field having to shoot things. And obviously that's not the best position for a baseball photograph. they're very limited in where they can go. I think it's wrong. I think photographers should be allowed to roam at least in the lower deck of a ballpark. I mean, they're not anywhere near the players. And I understand the concerns teams have about this, but and I don't know where they're at in every ballpark, but I do know for sure the ones at Wrigley are not in good position. And baseball really needs great photographs. We need great photographs. Uh, and it's just absurd to me to just to limit them to an area very, very far away.
We can't let you leave without asking you a big question about the Cubs. As we mentioned earlier, the Press Club was founded in 1908. The Baseball Writers Association of America was founded in 1908. And prior to 2016, that was the last time the Cubs won the World Series. And
I heard that.
It went on for more than a century. What was it like to cover the story of the Chicago Cubs in 2016?
Oh, it was amazing, especially for those of us, myself and probably a handful of other writers that were there in the 80s and 90s when, we watched some almost good Cub teams come close, especially in 2003, the Bartman game in the playoffs. We don't need to go into that, but most people understand that one. 98 team. So there was some semi-close calls. So going through all that, I really was thinking that I would go my whole life without seeing a Cubs championship. So having been fortunate enough to be in the press box and to cover it the year that they did win was very, very gratifying for me. I do have to say that I missed the story. I know people don't miss the story. I mean, Cleveland has the story now. They're the team that has never won in the longest time, and poor Cleveland. I do miss that kind of story for the Cubs because they're just basically another team now. They're a pretty good team, but I don't really see them as any different a franchise than the Dodgers or the Mets or anyone now that they've broken the streak. So I have to admit, maybe it's just me. I'm glad they won, but it did change the narrative of that story, and I missed that narrative a little bit.
Do you think that we're going to get through this full season and the postseason and the World Series?
Oh man, until yesterday, I was feeling very confident because summer camp really went pretty well, and the testings is, I think the last testing numbers that we saw was like 0.01% positives, which is relatively about as good as you can get in a non-bubble environment. But then the Marlins thing just, made me wonder if, it's just wishful thinking. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed, and I still think it can go the rest of the way, but I don't know. I mean, if you have a AAA team in Major League Baseball like the Marlins will be, it's just going to affect everything. And if teams aren't, if there's another situation like the Marlins, I don't know. I don't know how you get through it, honestly. I hope so because, like I said, it's great to be out there. And speaking on behalf of Chicago fans, I know that they love, even as weird as it is, they love watching baseball on TV right now.
Last question, a personal one. You're living a lot of kids' dream of being a baseball writer for a great newspaper. You mentioned earlier you're 61, you're president of the Baseball Writers Association of America. What do you love about what you do?
Wow. I mean, there's a lot. I guess what I love about it is it's the teams that I grew up watching, the ballparks that I, went to, although obviously Sox Park is, it's relatively new, 30 years old, but it's in the same area as Old Comiskey Park. So, I go to a ballpark, not this year, but in usual years, I see people that I know from my old friendships and relatives. And honestly, if I was doing this in another city, I don't know if I would like it, because I don't care about other teams. I do care about Chicago teams. I've been lucky to spend my whole life in the city that I love and for a paper that I grew up reading. And so, yeah, I realize how fortunate I am. And I would say to kids, if you love baseball and you like to write, this is definitely a great job. So look into it.
Our time is up. Our guest has been the president of the Baseball Writers Association of America, Paul Sullivan of the Chicago Tribune. Paul, we'd like to present you with our sterilized National Press Club coffee mug, along with our hope that you'll be able to join us in person here at the club in the very near future. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I would love to. Thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Our thanks to our producer, Lindsay Underwood, and our National Press Club team behind the scenes here at the Broadcast Operations Center. We thank you all for joining us. Be well, be safe, and have a good day.